Life is such a blur. Email details, more stuff. My business is consuming me. Am I really living? When do I get to do what energizes me and enjoy the rewards? Welcome to your second life. All is now doing what you love and loving what you do. It's radical creativity. Here's your host, the VIP coach, John Davidson.
John Davidson. Here's the VIP coach. It's John Davidson, the VIP coach. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, entrepreneurs worldwide, welcome to the VIP coach. You're listening to Radical Creativity. Thank you so much for tuning into our show. This is Coach JD, and we provide you this radio podcast, well, for individuals that are really all about growing in the new world. Folks, we're in the land of organic leadership. That's right. It's no longer about being mechanical. It's not about systems and processes. I know if you're listening to the show, you go, yep, I need to systematize my business. I need it to run on autopilot. But I got news for you. That's the wrong thing to do. And you're going to learn a lot more about that by listening to us. Because if you don't catch wind to some of these trends that are going on out there, you're going to become extinct real fast. And what you want to be on is the emerging and growth position of your industry life cycle. You want to be inventing the next wave. You want to be bringing in the next group of people, the next client base. You want to be bringing over all the investors. You want to bring over all the people that work for your competitor. And the way that you do that is you've got to change the way that you think. So in the VIP Coach, we help entrepreneurs become more creatively free, become more creatively valuable, and become way more on purpose. But I think we've got to talk about how someone gets there and make it realizable, make it so that you or anybody can follow some of these fundamentals, perspectives, habits, some of these strategies, so they can position themselves for this kind of radical creativity that we're talking about. Now, you might be asking yourself, JD, what does radical creativity mean? Well, I'm not saying that you can be more creative. What I am saying is we can help you be a better creator. Creativity and creating are two very different things, right? Think about it. There have been moments when you've been really creative, but you didn't create. And there were moments when you created and you weren't very creative. So they're two very separate things. We need to be clear about that. I'd rather take creating over creativity because creating is the intentional process of bringing something into being that doesn't exist yet. And that's really the namesake of what an entrepreneur does. So on today's show, let's talk about fundamentally what is going to have to happen for you to get freed up and reach this place of creativity so that you can create. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean that you can't create unless you have this creativity, but it's certainly going to be a lot easier. So what does it involve? What's the game like? How do we get freed up? What are we going to do in order to experience this maneuverability, this liberation as an entrepreneur? Well, you might be thinking, and this is one of the mirages, you might be thinking, well, JD, I'm just lost in the morass, man. I've got way too much stuff. I work at breakneck speed. I've got all these technologies to pay attention to. My mind is in 25 different directions every moment. My biggest challenge is slowing down. I know, that is your biggest challenge. You can't slow down. You can't stand still, and that's one of the fundamental reasons why you don't access your potential. And the reality is that slowing down is not a function of cleaning everything up around you. Slowing down is, in fact, a choice. Even if things are busy, even if you are terribly caught up in way too many things, and you've bitten off more than you can chew, like every entrepreneur, right? And you think you can do more than your limits can, right? Sound familiar? You can still be present in this moment. And it's just a matter of awareness. You see, it's a matter of how you play internally rather than how you're setting things up externally. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't change the external environment. Our whole program is geared toward perfecting an environment, setting up a team to help you avoid the blitz of activities and stuff and all the interruptions so that you can actually get freed up and get something done. I realize that. However, to get there, we got to start inserting and injecting some of these goods right now. Otherwise, you're going to lose all your enthusiasm. Because when all the complexity sets in, what happens is you get robbed of your soul. All the things that you love doing, you're not. You're doing all the things that you don't love doing, and yet you do them, and you're just left with nothing. They leave you empty, right? You're not enthusiastic about the activities that you do. And for most of the entrepreneurs, when we start with them, they hit this ceiling or they hit this threshold in their career where things have become kind of dull. The dentist that's done it year after year, or the financial planner that's done it over and over again. It's the same thing. It's mechanical. It's routine. It's become boring. And what they start doing is, out of that boredom, that gives rise to a whole bunch of other complexities. They start taking on businesses that don't work. They start getting involved in all these temporary gratifications, or they run off and do something stupid, or they put a substance in their body, or they start to screw up their marriage, or something that's going to be conflicting enough. I know this sounds kind of sick, but it's true, to manipulate their attention, because really what's going on isn't enough. So they've got to find enough complexity, enough crap to deal with, so they avoid boredom. And that's mostly what people are on, is they get really good at what they do. They go out in the world, they go out into the marketplace, they get excellent at getting all these checks, and then they reach a certain point in their career where that whole process of going to the next level, the whole idea of getting another check, is outlawed and ambushed by the boredom and the lack of desire to continue to move forward because of what it took to get here. They don't want to double that dose. They don't want to see it get even tougher. They don't want to have to try even harder. And so what they do is they level out. We see this in the program. The entrepreneur has systemically their income flatten over about a year or two, and about a year before they come in the VIP coach, they say, I really wish there were a way I could pull it all together. I've got all these ends in my life. I've got all these areas that I really want to have pulled together, from my personal life to my professional, from my mind to my body to all my spiritual stuff to the whole composition of me. I have a technicolor life, JD, but I've got to find a way to put it all together. And that's primarily what our program is geared to do, is to remove all the stuff. And that's the first objective of our program, is to start the entrepreneur paying attention to and getting access to all the great activities and all the great things in their life that just drives up their energy and their enthusiasm. Now, that's the external side. But what about the internal side? And what we find more often than not is that the internal side has actually influenced more often the external side. In other words, psychologically and internally, what's going on is really the kind of underlying assumptions or concepts. The inner world of the person has a lot to do with the outer world conditions. How does that work? How does the inner world connect so much to the outer world? Well, we're caught up in thought. We have all sorts of thoughts and judgments, and a lot of our judgments that we've taken on, they're just not true. In fact, they're contradictory to the possibilities that the future has for us. In essence, we put up our own limits. And we do that because we start having a perspective fundamentally of ourselves and the world around us that gets the future fixed. It gets us caught up in wanting everything to look the same. See, that's what happens. When we store data in our mind and we move through time, the mind, the brain that you have, it wants everything to look the same. So we call up the past experiences to make sense of the present. And a lot of times what we have on those past experiences, whatever we concluded about them, we converted those into rules and dogma, and they have edges and their perspectives and their outlooks, and it's the storyline, and it's the way it was supposed to go, and it's what it's supposed to be. And then suddenly reality is, right, it's impermanent, and it shows something different, and serendipitously, whoop, why did that happen? Oh no, why did I lose that person? Or whoa, why did that change? And suddenly the universe, we feel, is on us, and we say, oh man, this thing's imposed on us. Why? I'm under attack. Life feels so threatening. Why did that happen? And whoop, here come all the concepts. Whoop, here come all the self-opinions. And then what happens is we have an identity quake, right? We begin kind of internalizing. If we're failing, if things aren't going the way we expected, we begin to kind of make sense of it through who we are, right? And then we start marrying who we are to what is going on, to our experience. And when that happens, there's no longer a creator, it's a reactor, a person who becomes so emotionally distraught or emotionally run down, emotionally tired, emotionally fatigued. It's interesting how all these sort of, as I call them, camouflaging manifestations start to show up in their life. They get sick, they get run down, people do certain things around them, and it's very interesting how their very assumptions or the way in which they look at the world often, coincidentally, has so much to do with the way the world is played out. I'm not suggesting that we create our own reality. However, we try to discern reality, and in fact what we do is we actually change our experience of reality by the way that we look at it and the concepts and the dogma from which we look. But a lot of us have gone asleep. We aren't even aware of the contents of our own mind. And what we can't do is give thought its right place. We need thought to drive a car, right? We need thought to do certain things to sustain our health and be alive or eat. We need thought to do those things. But when we try to use thought to assume what someone else is intending to do before even asking them, oh man, that's just danger for a breakdown in a relationship. I mean, I saw that just this last week where we had two partners in a business, and one partner's thinking the other's doing this, and then as a result of his behavior playing out on that assumption, the other looks back at him, and of course, now he's given rise from his reaction, now it fires back to the other, and they're both kind of looking at each other's sort of reactions of each other, rather than looking at their actual people, who they actually are. They're actually looking at the contents of their own minds. They're not really looking at each other. And they're both caught up, and they're digging their hooves in, and they're starting to get into these deadly dynamics where both of them are like putting up guards, right? They got all these funky agendas, and then when the guy says this, the other one says, what's wrong with you, and why'd you do that? And yet, right before their eyes, they're both blaming one another and saying, well, you're wrong, and so forth. So we could really see how these complex systems, where the way things interdependently interact, give rise to patterns of behavior. But what happens? Let's look at this. What happens when we kind of take away the concept? What happens when we take the curtains off of the window? I've said this on the show before. And we start to really look at what's out there. What happens when we really start to look at what's out the window? What happens? What happens is we kind of stand still long enough to sense what's out there. We begin to see what's really going on. In other words, whatever's there, it kind of is aware of us. Have you ever been in the forest and you just stood so still that you could almost sense the forest's awareness of you? Think about that. Have you ever gone out into a place where there's a lot of people in a spire or maybe a train terminal or, and you're really sensing as you just stop as if you were the silent observer or all the sound was taken away and you could just observe, maybe isolating your observations to one sense. What would you sense? What kind of knowing might emerge other than what you tend to tell yourself about what's going on? You see, what the entrepreneur can do is reach a point in his being, is to enter a higher capacity of being in a moment by actually emptying out the contents of his mind. I mean actually entering with a fresh mind, coming in and looking at what's there and originating what he wants from nothing. Isn't that what creating is about? When we create, we don't use our current situation as a place from which we desire things, right? We desire things out of our own love for wanting them to exist. We create them because they matter to us. And those kind of urges and those textures from our heart also inhibit, well, when they're not working, they inhibit our heart. They defend our heart. We get cynical or we ridicule our ideas or we flare up because we blame another and we're disconnecting ourselves. We become like porcupines. We become venomous with those porcupine quills because we don't want people to find out. We don't want to get caught. So despite looking at our business as a machine, it is an emotional place. Business is a series of relationships. We exist within a relationship with everybody. We exist within the networks that we have. And a business is a vast network that gives rise to patterns of behavior in that network. And that network, that larger story, that larger pattern of action that's probably born out of the internal thinking of the individual actors has more dominance in the outcome, has more cause to the effect than the individual genetics, the individual attitudes, the individual talents. It's the storyline, folks. And that would suggest that most of the time, the structures that we're in that underlie what we do give rise to our behavior. And if we don't look at the underlying structure, we're not going to look at the behaviors. We're not going to make change, right? So we're too busy trying to shift around the topsoil. We're too busy moving it around like positive thinking, willpower, right? Trying to think right, trying to cure and cope and trying to calm down and trying to feel better and, denial or we're trying to ameliorate the unwanted circumstances as opposed to really looking at what's there. I think one of the strongest capacities of leadership that I've ever seen is the capacity to stay. In other words, for an individual leader to stay with the good, the bad, and the ugly conditions and purely define them as they are. One of the hardest things to do, because what he does is he compares those conditions. He says, well, those aren't good enough, or the reason I should have done better than these, and so forth. But instead, if we just look at them and we stay. Think about the Japanese artist. Before he paints, he goes out there on the precipice. He watches and looks. And there's no ending to that process. It's when it's ready. He's patient. He's looking. He absorbs. He marinates. He stands into it long enough until he gets enlightened. He knows. He sees it. But he's intimate with it. But we can't do that. See, we can't do that. We can't just take away the dead branches in our garden and observe the emerging leaf. No, it's got to be done, and it's got to be done by this, and it's got to have that, and it's got to have steps and predictability, and it's got to have control. And we're too busy kind of strangling and manipulating reality as opposed to more organically kind of following the context in motion. And that, folks, is the secret of leadership today, is that kind of leader that is so open and receptive that he can sense the emerging futures that are casting their shadow on the present. That's right. Because most of the time, you're standing before an organization that has an atmospheric condition. It has space and vastness, and something in it is given order. Something in it has energy, and that energy gives rise to design. And if you can just sense what that is and find your place, without taking over or without having a sense of too much responsibility, but really seeing what the system wants, it's much different. Really think about what I'm saying. Think about the moments in your life when this might have played out. Really think about that. When was a time when you had said, well, I really expected it to go this way, and it didn't? And what did you do about it? How did you play into that? Did you just stay with it? Did you define the current conditions? See, current reality is like an acquired taste. Were you able to just stay with what it is? Or did you start to tarnish it? Did you begin to freak out? Did you start to run from it? Did you hide it? What did you do? Just take a look. I'm not saying to cure that. We're not here to fix your quirks. I don't want this program to be about self-improvement, because it's not. That actually begets the very things that we're trying to get away from in ourselves. So don't go there, but at least look. All right, I'm going to take a quick break, think about it, and I'll be right back.
Having a life where you have the creative freedom to do what you love and to offer the world something that only you can bring to the table. That is the world of high-level performance with John Davidson. That is the world of radical creativity. That is the world that you can be a part of when you realize all that is holding you back is you. Begin the journey through one-on-one coaching that gives you the finesse for business and lifetime achievement, and find your place on the roadmap to high-level performance today. Visit highlevelperformance.com. What matters to me? What is my true work? Monetize your passion and enjoy creative freedom with the VIP Coach. You're listening to Radical Creativity with Executive Performance Coach John Davidson.
Woo! We're getting deep. We're talking about the deep stuff. Yeah, we're talking about the inside world of the entrepreneur and how it leads to the outside world. And that there are some very complex systems. And they are existing. They are all around us, folks. I think one of the big lessons that we've got to really look at is this idea of impermanence. And impermanence meaning that the moment that we're in, the present that we're observing, is not the same as the one this moment. And where I was back then is not this moment. And where I was right there is not this moment. In that everything that we see, in other words, we're seeking sameness. We think it's all looking the same, but everything's in a dynamic movement. It really is, right? In the world of physics, they say everything is dynamic and flowing. Even the chair that you're in is actually moving, but we make sense of it through thought. And just imagine, if you can get wind of this, that most of the thought that we give to what we see is what's beholding or preserving that sameness. And those are beliefs. Those are concepts. So can you imagine coming in without anything accumulated, actually coming in and observing something factually? I think that's what love is we observe something with that sense of intimacy and purity without imposing anything on it, right? We soften it that way. And when we look at it that way, we call forth or we give rise to something in ourselves. It might be compassion, or it might be, it might be something. It could be, who knows, it could be kindness, it could be generosity, it could be understanding, which we all have in our nature. We just have to lean in and look and stay. But what do we compare it to? What does the Creator compare it to? Well, instead of comparing it to the story or who we're supposed to be, we got to compare it to what we want to create. And this is the big breakthrough. This is the last part of this show today. Is it's all about what we're creating. See, are we really organizing our actions around what is going wrong? Are we organizing our actions around reacting and responding to the circumstances? Do we have something to do about that? Sure we do. We can make a fundamental choice. I've said this on this show all along. Make a choice to become a predominant creative force in your life. What happens when you do that? Suddenly, what happens is you realize that no matter what the conditions are, you remember that the creative process is independent, that which we bring into being and cause to exist is a function of our choices. So that would imply that, you guys, everything is up for grabs, right? That means right now, this moment, you could rethink your life. And at this moment, you could rethink your life. And where you want to spend your time and what you want to create and your life-building process, all of that is not related to, is not disqualified by the conditions that you currently have. The conditions are the conditions. They're discrepant to those other conditions, right? That's okay. As long as they are, that's great. Remember, that establishes structural tension. That gives rise to a new pattern, a positive pattern that summons nature. In other words, current reality, when it's discrepant to or different than the actual desires that we have, right, that causes a powerful pressure system. It seeks closure automatically. So we've got to be honest about what's going on, and we got to stay true to our hearts and what we want to create. Where do desires originate from? Where do they come from? Well, desire means of the Lord or of the King. So desire originates from your soul. It originates from that deepest part of you, the ground of your being, your deepest aspirations. And I think what this means, if you are desiring, what this means is that you desire a world that you create and then you live in it. That's what the entrepreneur existence is to live within desired creations, is to live within a created universe, and that you live within the universes that you create. How cool is that? But what you have to do is you got to come to terms on your own answers, right? Not the answers about what everything is, but come to terms with your own truth. What matters to me does not need to be justified. It is something that's totally authentic. It doesn't need to be justified. I don't have to make it make sense to you. You know, it's what's in our hearts, what matters to us is a very private thing. It really is. And what matters to us can become a great source of learning. So what does it mean to consider what matters every moment? I think that's what thinking strategically is about, is that we consider together with those that we co-create with what really matters. And if you look at most board meetings today, if you look at most boardrooms or most company meetings, we're not talking about what matters. We're talking about what's wrong. We're talking about problems and who's going to solve them and what are we going to eliminate, what are we going to stop, and what are we going to end. And the whole meeting is structured around something going away, rather than learning from an emerging future result that we're wanting to cultivate, that's born out of our intrinsic desire. We connect with it, and we're consistently lighting that flame. You see, that is bigger business than all of the stuff, all of the current circumstances that impose challenges on us. So this puts the current circumstances in a new light. What are we comparing it to? We're comparing it to what really matters to us. That's all it really needs to be compared to, right? Because when we compare it to it, we go, oh, wait a minute. Current reality? Gosh, it's not working. You know, I'm really failing here, or I'm excelling here, or this is working for us, or this isn't working for us. But you know, something happens. We don't want to look at reality because of counteractive loyalties. The team doesn't want to look at reality because we can't talk about the truth. I might lose my job, or if so-and-so finds out, they're going to be in trouble, or I don't want to upset the norm, or I don't want to interrupt the calmness. So we got 15 reasons not to talk about the truth, and if we did and we stopped dancing around it, we'd be able to get to the point and actually make some critical adjustments, and probably timed right. But no, we've got to have self-preservation. We don't want the discomfort of current reality. See, we can see a very clear complexity here. We can see that the team is completely shut down. We can't create, we can't have timely decisions because we can't scale the business, at that value to commit to the truth. We're committed to lying. We're committed to being dishonest. We're committed to having plenty of reasons not to talk about what's going on. So we have limited feedback. The feedback most of the time that we get is so short, it's so short-sighted, and it's inaccurate that we're solving all kinds of problems with actions that are trying to solve those problems. Then the problems go away, the original actions go away too, and guess what? The problems come back. That's what the system wants. That's what the system does. It doesn't work that way. You see this, right? You see the defects in it. That there are larger systems from which we are an actor, and we influence these systems, and we get ourselves stuck in these systems. But we don't want to take the time to look at them. We'd rather just be short-sighted and get caught up in the incessant freneticness of work and just kind of go along with things and hope that, well, maybe the world will care. Maybe there is responsibility elsewhere. Maybe it'll just put itself out. And that even worsens it, right? Because that compounds the issue. We delay it, You know how that goes, right? That's like delaying a root canal. You delay it, you don't want to get to it, you put it off, and boom, you end up paying $1,000 versus paying $250 or $300 for a filling. It turns into a terrible situation, an abscess tooth, an infection. So that's what we do. We get indecisive. We procrastinate because we don't want to change. We don't want to get to things that need to change. We already got too much to do, JD. We don't want to put that on our plate. We wouldn't want to deal with that. So we might as well just hire the same, make the same hiring mistake 23 times again instead of looking at the the systemic causes of what might be leading to this situation fundamentally. We don't want to look at the issue beneath the issue. And that right there, my friends, is what prevents us from prevailing in being better creators. Because we could basically help systems that help us enact a kind of creativity toward that which what we create is supported by the system itself rather than outlawed by the system. Yes, there are systems that we gear out of our lack of thinking or our automatic judgment or our poor models of the world that are inaccurate, right? Or our urges, our cynicism and our fears and those concepts, our fear of humiliation. We set things up, and that's what happens. And I see this playing out all the time. So what do you do? What are some steps that you can take? Well, number one is educate yourself. Hire a coach or start reading about systems thinking. Start learning about more complex systems and some of the archetypes like fixes that backfire or shifting the burden or tragedy of the commons. Hit yourself up with The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge. I highly recommend it. A book back in the 90s, but very relevant and a much deeper look into the fifth discipline, which is systems thinking, and it ties 4 other disciplines together. Another great book that we recommend in our program is by Robert Fritz. It's a book called Creating, a very close sister to systems thinking, Structural Dynamics. Very similar, just a few differences, but they're all geared towards the same thing, that the primacy of the whole is what controls or influences the parts and the behavior of the parts. And so when we have certain thinking or we have conflicting goals, these elements, when they interact, give rise to certain patterns of behavior that work for or against us. When individuals carry certain outlooks, when the culture of the organization, by design or by non-design, involuntarily starts to, work itself into certain ways of behaving and acting, invisibly these things happen. Patterns start to come up. Limiting stuckness starts to come up. We don't really see the system's effects until we start to notice the limitations. See, we see the impact of the systems, but we don't notice the systems before then. So what if you had a way to see the dashboard before the engine block were cracking? What if there were a way where you could see these emerging systems and you could connect them to really where you tend to fall responsibly into them? That's what coaching is about. So if something in this session, something in this podcast got your attention and got you excited, go to highlevelperformance.com. That's highlevelperformance.com. Or call us at 714-375-6624. We'd love to talk to you more about supporting you in being an organic leader, being a winning leader, and locating the kind of creative freedom and the creative value and the sense of creative purpose that our clients tend to enjoy after years of work with us. Thank you very much. This is JD. This was our show. It is May 27th, 2011. Radical Creativity and Coach JD signing off.
For more tools on how to liberate your gifts, become more valuable, and on purpose through radical creativity with executive performance coach John Davidson, visit highlevelperformance.com and be sure to follow John on Facebook. Check back soon to continue the journey toward radical creativity.